Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast where small business owners are celebrated as the backbone of the American economy. Each week, we introduce you to tycoons who share their stories and advice so that small business owners may learn from their experiences. Tycoons is powered by Backbone Planning Partners. Join us now as our hosts connect you to today's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I am your host here, as always, Austin Peterson, coming to you live today from Mesa, Arizona. And we've got a great guest on the show today. If this is your first time listening, you're going to enjoy hearing Brian's story. We've got Brian Schafer coming in from McCall, Idaho. So many of you may not know where McCall is, but most of you have probably heard of Coeur d'Alene. So it's relatively close. I'll let Brian kind of explain that. But Brian is the CEO and founder of Edgewood Log Homes and Big Cabin Log and Timber. So that part of the country is obviously very well known for that type of building. So Brian, welcome to the show, and we're excited to hear your story.
Thank you, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we were just commenting before the show started about how beautiful it looks there in McCall, Idaho. You know, for those of you who aren't watching it on video, Brian's sitting there in what looks to be a living room, maybe the living room of his house. The doors open, the sun's shining. You know, for a guy who lives in Arizona, actually today it's pretty mild considering it's only 83 degrees right now and on our way to a high of 94. So that's better than the 115 that it was last week.
We typically get a 30, 40 degree temperature swing from day to night here at this elevation. Yeah, it's high 40s, low 50s at night. We get up 75 during the day, heat of the day. So it's a perfect time of year.
Yeah, nothing wrong with 75. So speaking of 75, not to put the spotlight on me, but 75 is about the temperature that it was on Saturday. I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I competed in an Ironman 70.3 race in Madison, Wisconsin on Saturday. And it was 75, but with about 80% humidity when I finished that race. And I'd run the last probably 7 miles in unabated sun. I mean, it's beating down on you. And to make matters worse, I'm running on a pathway next to the lake that I did the swim in earlier that morning. And the sun's also then reflecting off the lake, making it that much worse. And man, by the time I hit mile 11, I thought, what in the world did I sign up for? Am I going to be able to finish this? This is crazy.
I can imagine. So if you've done Ironman, you've probably been to Coeur d'Alene then. Is that true?
So I've been to Coeur d'Alene, but I've never done an Ironman in Coeur d'Alene. But
Okay.
I couldn't imagine a more picturesque place to do one. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty popular for that reason alone, amongst others, from what I hear. But yeah, that's impressive. I used to run a bit. Never did any Ironmans, but did, like in Spokane, they have a Bloomsday race. I think it's a 10K or something, and I used to run that.
Yeah.
But yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I tell you, it's crazy to see some of these athletes that show up, and the statistics are actually that only about 2%, less than 2% of the population will ever even attempt an Ironman. So it's a pretty small percentage of the population anyway. But when you get there and you see these people and you think, this is crazy. There were 1,500 that did the 70.3 on Saturday, and about 1,400 that did the full Ironman, so 140.6 on Sunday. And out of those, call it 3,000 people, 15 of them were doing both. I couldn't imagine. And the crazy thing is there were males and females in their late 70s. And as a matter of fact, I got the results yesterday in email, and they don't give you the full details, but a male in the 75 to 79 age range finished the race an hour and a half faster than I finished it. And I'm 47.
Wow.
So, yeah,
That's good genetics.
Yeah, good genetics, and I'm sure, he's been doing this for a number of years. You don't just decide at 75, I'm gonna go do an Ironman and complete it that quickly, But
Wow, amazing.
so
That's great. That's a great story. I like that.
yeah, very cool. So Brian, tell us your story. Tell us, where you grew up. I know you got started in this business very early on. So just kind of give us your history, what got you started. If you want to sprinkle in your family stuff, great. If not, that's fine too.
Okay, yeah. So I was born and raised up to about the age of 12 in Montana, product of two original homestead families coming together, and then so I obviously enjoyed the lifestyle there, growing up there in my early years, and literally fishing almost daily and hunting and gathering. In fact, I didn't we ate primarily from the land, had a big garden and wild game, and I don't think I ever tasted beef until we moved from Montana. But we didn't move far. We moved to Idaho, and northern Idaho, and been in Idaho ever since. A lot of my family is still in Montana, and in fact, the original homestead on my dad's side is still in the family along Flathead Lake in Montana. And so I'm back there a lot. And then in Idaho, I went through the rest of public school in Idaho, and started my business in Idaho in an area known as Lewiston, Idaho is where I was at the time. And then started my business there, and I think most of the rest of the story from there once I started my business.
Yeah, I do, but our listeners don't. So maybe kind of fill them in on what led you to log homes, or what led you to entrepreneurship in general, and then kind of the history of the company.
Well, probably similar to your 75-year-old guy that just blew you out of the water in your Ironman. I think the entrepreneurial gene is it's in me, mostly probably from my dad's side of the family. So, at a young age in Montana, I remember we used to go down and get a haircut once a month at the local barber shop in town. And I remember one time I was probably 6, and I asked the barber, I saw some decorations, in the storefront window there. And he said it was his Christmas decorations, his sad attempt at Christmas decorations. And he wished he had some pine boughs that he could put around the window. And I said, well, if I bring you some, will you buy them from me? And he said, sure. So I got my little red wagon and my hatchet and some baling twine, and went up in the woods behind town, and got a load, and just wheeled it down the sidewalk. And every time not every time, but a lot of the stores, I pass by and they say, what are you doing with those? And I tell them, and they'd say, well, bring us a load. So I earned money to buy my first unique bicycle that I wanted by doing that. And then along the way, teenage years in Idaho, similar stories. I just see an opportunity and try and capitalize on it, and make a little money, and always trying to think a little bit outside the box, and just see a need and try and meet the need. And then in high school I took some of the trade courses, welding, and I learned the basics of welding and fabrication and building, and then worked construction. When I left high school, a couple months before graduation. I was cruising along with a 3 point something grade average, and only had 2 classes, and way ahead on credits and board, and was offered a great paying construction job. And I thought, I don't really need that piece of paper. So I went and took the job, and worked construction for, general construction, labor, carpenter, concrete work, that sort of thing, for a couple of years. And then when I was about 20, I went to work for my father in his mill that he was building in the Lewis and Clarkson Valley. And it was a whole log chipping plant that would take what are known as pulp logs, defective logs that the sawmills don't want, and chip them up into chips for pulp to make paper. Because there is a paper mill in Lewiston, pretty sizable one. And so I went to work for him, and that was sort of when everything sort of clicked for me. I got to utilize my welding skills, equipment operation, building skills, because we actually built the plant ourselves, and then started running it. after it was built. And it was my father actually that came along and said, this is in like 80, about 1980, approximately 81. He said this house log thing is starting to really take off. And it was really centered at that time in the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, based around a large volume of beetle-killed lodgepole pine that was covering a big geographic area in Montana. But it was really starting to take off. And back then it was just, they were cabins. Nobody was building big, sophisticated, opulent log homes that hadn't really been considered as any kind of a significant business model. But we were getting a lot of beautiful dead logs into the chip mill, and it just seemed a shame to chip them up to make paper when they could go into a beautiful log cabin. And so by this time I was the manager of the chipping operation, at about 30 plus guys under me, and I was 20 or 21 at the time. And he said, well, in your spare time, build a mill to make logs for log homes. And so I did. And that was before, the internet or anything. So I got intrigued by it all, and I went to the library and got books on log cabin building, and would read at night. And, I read every day, and I try and do my own research, and I became enamored with the whole thing. And so within a year or so after that, he sold the chip mill to a big corporation from the Portland, Oregon area, and they didn't really want to have anything to do with the house log side of the little operation. So at that time, I decided to go into business, on my own, and start my log home company, which I did. And so that was about 82 when I started.
Yeah. And the rest, as they say, is history, right?
Yeah. I guess I'd have to say that, in my genetics, I have sort of a perfectionist side to me, and I like to do things differently. And so within this industry, I did recognize at that young age that the industry was in its infancy, and that getting in on an industry that I felt was going to really blossom, getting in early, I felt was a good idea. Most of my family thought I was crazy, because the big corporation did ask me to stay on as the general manager of the chipping facility, and offered me a wage that, in today's dollars was probably $250,000 a year, something like that. And, here I am don't even have a high school degree. And that was a lot of money to turn down. So most thought I was crazy and questioned my sanity, but I never did. It was actually the first decision, I'd say, probably maybe only the only one I ever made that I had zero doubt about.
Yeah.
And knew I could make it. And so did. And each time, as we've evolved as a company, or a group of companies, it's been about either needing to evolve or sort of think outside the box to address a downturn in the industry, or just, trying to stay ahead in the evolution of the industry. And I do love that.
Yeah. Well, I think you made that tough decision that all entrepreneurs kind of look back on and say, that was the one, right? And I had a conversation with a guy yesterday who made the opposite decision, right? I mean, he'd been working at an organization for a decent amount of time. He was making good money, had good benefits. His wife was pregnant, and his friend / coworker was going to start his own organization. Essentially, there were some customers of the current organization saying, you really should just start your own company. We appreciate what you do. We're not enamored with the current company that you work for. And so he took that leap and asked the guy that I was speaking to yesterday to be his partner 50-50 and start the organization. And because his wife was pregnant, and because the benefits were there, and because the wage was there, he opted to stay. Well, the friend went and started the organization. Fast forward several years, he ends up, going over and working for him and running the organization and getting some equity, right? But not 50-50 equity, because he didn't make that leap. And, I think to this day, I don't know if he would term it as a regret, because he did what he needed to do for his family, and he was comfortable with that. But that's the difference between an entrepreneur maybe and somebody who is a good operator.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've in my professional career thus far, I've seen a lot of good operators, um, but entrepreneur that is a special breed, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Edgewood. I mean, anybody who's looked into log homes, specifically in the Western US, and probably anywhere, quite frankly, has heard of Edgewood homes. I've looked at log cabins over the years, and my wife goes back and forth on whether that's the aesthetic that she's interested in, and whatever. And so we haven't pulled the trigger on anything for us personally, but what makes Edgewood different than the other log cabin, home builders that are out there?
Well, there are two types of log homes. There's the milled log home, where the logs are quasi-uniform, and then there's handcrafted log homes. And the milled log homes, of course, are using machinery to do most or all the work. Is just what it sounds like. It's done, with guys with chainsaws and chisels and tools, and very little, if any, heavy equipment is utilized, other than lifting devices for cranes and that sort of thing for handling the logs. But the fitting of the logs is done primarily by hand. As you might imagine, that's a laborious, very linear process, whereas the milling can be done much, much faster. And historically now, for the last 30 years or so, handcrafting is pretty well known as being more expensive and more authentic, etc. And milling tends to be utilized more for cabins and smaller homes, whereas the big opulent homes tend to be handcrafted or some level of handcrafting. And so those are differences in the industry. And all of them, I would say basically all of them now. I mean, the Great Recession wiped out a huge swath of the log home industry. And so there aren't many left. In fact, I realized recently that I'm of the group that really started in the late 70s and early 80s in Western Montana and Northern Idaho. I'm the only one still doing it. It didn't dawn on me until recently, even though it's been that way for about 10 years now. But I know a lot of those owners that have retired or sold, and so sometimes we even stay in touch sometimes. But basically, I would have to say at this point that whether it's handcrafted or milled, that they're still basically suppliers of a log package. That's their business model for the most part. Now, you do have some that are trying to do what's known as a weather-tight shell, and they have varying levels of success with that. But they're bringing in maybe a set of drawings from the internet, or their cousin drew it or whatever, and then that company is going to either handcraft or mill a package of logs and or weather-tight shell to fit that design that someone else did. So that by definition is a supplier of a custom product. Edgewood is a design build company of sophisticated log home projects. And so a client comes to us. I'll use a current project as an example. This is in Colorado. And the client first contacted me about 3 years ago and said, I grew up in this small town in Colorado. I moved to Denver. I made my way. I'm successful. I want to build my dream log home back in my little hometown and eventually resettle back there. But we'll use it part-time in the meantime. And he said, and we've done our homework and we've been stalking you for about 5 years. And we're not talking to anyone else, and we don't want anybody else to do it. And we understand about where the price points are. So how do we get started? And so I that's one of the reasons Edgewood now just does one project at a time, which further in the discussion leads into the genesis, or why did I create Big Cabin, and what's the difference between the two. But I realized during the recession, really, that I really just wanted to focus on one project at a time, so I could give that client that direct focus on their project, from initial consultation of, is this a good site or not? And if so, where and how is it oriented, like an architect does? And that's really how that's the role I'm playing at that point. And help with budgeting and overall scheduling, et cetera, that the general contractor often does. And at this point, that a contractor had not been chosen. And that's very typical of an Edgewood project. And so then we work through initial budgeting. I do a takeoff that gives kind of a general description of the home. Again, it's not been designed yet. Oftentimes using a past project as a basis model for theirs, which we did in this case as well. And we outline square footage and rooms per level, and come up with an overall budget for our design, service, and materials production and delivery, and on-site assembly and or technical assistance in assembling it. And then so we walk the client all the way through the design, manufacture the package. We even help them make decisions on the general contractor. I interviewed the general contractors on their behalf, and one was chosen. And then we worked directly with the GC during the construction phase, and even get involved with the selection of colors and interior finishes. And so the interior designers work closely with us and we help make the client make the right decisions in those areas. And a complete Edgewood project delivered is already stained and finished, which is very unusual in the industries, because I see that as a huge plus, in that it not only eliminates a lot of the on-site inconsistencies of different tradespeople showing up when they want and not understanding log homes, perhaps, because that's another big issue. Is this is about a 15,000 square foot home, and many times the subtrades have not experienced that level of sophistication in a log home, and things don't always get done the way they should. And that's one of the reasons I decided with Edgewood that we would just do one at a time. We would do it. My clients would always say, they tell me, Brian, we wish you'd do more, because everything you guys do were great, but the sub did this and did that. So I tried to eliminate as many of those inconsistencies as possible with Edgewood. And that's really what we do at Edgewood, is that we're the owner's agent all the way through the process, and not a supplier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting concept, as you think about the construction industry as a whole, there's not really a descriptor or a word that you would use to explain what it is that you guys do, right? Because you're not just the architect, you're not the general contractor, you're not, you know what I'm saying? Like there's different aspects of the build that you're involved in all the way along, in addition to being the supplier of the logs themselves.
Correct. Yeah, it is extremely unique, and it does not fit into the mainstream business or construction model. Typically a client would decide they want to build their dream log home in the mountains, and the first thing they usually do would seek out an architect. And unfortunately, there's no log architecture 101 in school. There's every one of them that has ever done log has had to learn as they go, as I did. And some of them have gotten quite good at it and some haven't. But they hire an architect, and then the architect's engineer may or may not have experience with log, and the structural engineer. And then they have to select a general contractor. Now we've got 3 different entities coming together that may or may not have significant experience in high-end sophisticated log home design and construction. And then that gives those individuals, not that this always happens, but it happens often, gives those individuals somebody else to point fingers at. And so when things take longer and cost more, they can say, well, the engineers made us do this, and the log guy said they have to do it this way. And so in our scenario, there's only one place to point a finger, and it's directly at me.
Yeah. Yeah, which I mean, obviously makes sense as to why you only do one project at a time. And I think the fact that you just mentioned that the one you're doing in Colorado right now is 14 or 15,000 square feet. So these are not low cost builds that you guys are doing at Edgewood.
Correct. Yeah, they tend to be. We've got another one coming up next year that's actually a little bit larger in North Idaho, and similar situation and story. And it's interesting. Our client base, the demographic is so amazingly similar and consistent. They tend to be self-made, successful individuals, and they understand and appreciate that they want, in the case of the North Idaho client, what his words to me was, I want you to design and build a work of art so I can live there the rest of my life. And so they seek out the best. One of the reasons they've been successful as individuals is in their own businesses is they seek out the best talent. They turn them loose. They pay them well. They don't expect them to do it for nothing. And it's actually a wonderful business for me because a tremendous amount of fulfillment comes from helping these folks, achieve their dream.
Yeah. So we're going to get into the difference between Big Cabin and Edgewood, right? And you've kind of laid that out just a little bit, but is Edgewood where you spend 90% of your time, 100% of your time, 70% of your time? What's your personal time split between the two?
Well, right now it's mostly Big Cabin for two reasons. One is Edgewood, because I've been doing this for so many years already. I've gotten pretty efficient at it with the support staff I have, but also because Big Cabin is sort of still its infancy, so to speak. It's more or less a startup, and so I'm having to spend quite a bit of time on Big Cabin. So right now I'm more probably 30-70 between Edgewood and Big Cabin, but the goal within the next 2 years is to have it back to where it's only about 10% Big Cabin, and the rest is Edgewood and some of the other things I want to do with my time.
Gotcha. So, I mean, obviously those who aren't looking on video, by the way, you look great for your age, but when you've been doing this for 40 years, you're not a young guy. So you've obviously got other things that you want to do with your life as you get older as well. Right. But let's talk about Big Cabin, Edgewood, why you started Big Cabin, why you refer to it as a startup, how long it's been operating, and then what is your plan to get to where you're spending very little time in Big Cabin?
So Big Cabin is an idea I had. I started with this idea probably at least 50, close to almost 20 years ago now. I had this idea of creating a second company, and its main purpose was to allow me to, as I said, focus on one project at a time. The Edgewood client and project, which I love the entire process when I'm able to focus on it directly, and also give me more free time to do other things I want to do. But also I've got a large production facility. I mean, we were probably one of the top 3 to 5 producers in handcrafted log home world before the recession, just in dollar volume wise. We did a $27 million ski in, ski out condo project in Telluride, Colorado that was 10,000 square foot, handcrafted custom log buildings that were very, very ornate and, 45 course of log height, 45 corners, very complex. I don't know. I actually don't know anybody else that may. There might be a few that could at the time that could have done it, but so we could produce a lot, and we still can. And my staff is still with me, and so I wasn't going to be able to keep them busy with one house at a time. And so I thought, why not take some of these unique building systems that I've invented over the years, of which we focused in on 4 of them. There are a few others, but we're focused on 4 systems with Big Cabin, and make them available to the masses. I remember one time having an architect from Colorado call me, and it was either Vail or not sure which resort it was, but he said, we saw this home you did in Breckenridge with the glass forest. And I've got a project coming up. It's not log, but we'd love to have a glass forest in it. And I just said, thank you. I appreciate the comments, but we only do glass forest and Edgewood projects. And so off he went. And so I thought, what if we could answer yes to that question? And so Big Cabin's main focus and description is, we're a very sophisticated supplier of very sophisticated building systems unique to the mountain architecture world. Now we've got mountain modern, which are flat roof, contemporary style buildings, but they still incorporate a lot of metal and a lot of wood, high end finishes, and so on. So Big Cabin is meant to be a factory direct source to architects, developers, builders, and some do-it-yourselfers even that have the sophistication to do it, of these systems that were previously only available to Edgewood clients. So that's really what Big Cabin's purpose is, and we're doing a lot of that with Big Cabin. And moving forward, why I still call it a startup is we're learning as we go. Each of the 4 systems, one of my guys very, very intuitively said one time, any one of these 4 systems could be its own business. And, I never thought of it that way until he said it, but he's absolutely right. And we weren't sure which one would be the most, popular or take off the most. The Schafer wall system, which I created and received a patent for, is the world's first panelized, handcrafted log wall system that comes with the only written warranty I know of for a log home not to settle. And I've been careful not to publicly, put that out there too much because I'm trying to match our production capacity with demand. But that has been taking off as I anticipated it would. So we've just built a new computerized production line to help us keep up with demand. But the other area that really has taken off has been the Schafer wood antiquing process to siding and timbers, etc. So again, this year we've built a new production line for that and learned a lot along the way. So we still kind of feel like it's still kind of a startup at this point.
Yeah. So for lack of a better term, because I think this diminishes what it is that you guys do at Big Cabin, but you're essentially building these handcrafted, very sophisticated building kits for log homes. Is that a fair way to put it out there in terminology that most of the world would understand?
Yes. A lot of our clients are choosing to come to Big Cabin instead of one of the other traditional log home companies for a log home kit based on someone else's design, not Brian's design, not Edgewood's design, because they see the value in those sophisticated building systems, the Schafer wall, the thermal blanket roof, etc. And so that's its own market right there. But then we also have a number of projects where we're doing one in North Carolina this next spring where we're doing just a glass forest in a contemporary mountain modern home. We are doing a ton of our Shoshugiban timber and log siding projects that are going on commercial buildings. Did a big building at University of Idaho a couple of years ago. And then we also have another project where it's a conventional lakeside, conventional construction, stick frame construction, lakeside home, but they wanted the feeling of log in the ceiling, so they're doing a thermal blanket roof system with log supports and all that bison board over the top. And so, yeah, basically you can come and select as much or as little of these systems that you want to include into your project.
Yeah. All right. So you've kind of mentioned the four things that you guys focus on outside of just the fact that your building kit is pretty sophisticated in the way that it comes together and, like you said, pre-stained, all that kind of stuff. But the 4 things, just to kind of reiterate for the listening audience: the glass forest, the Schafer wall, the Schafer wood, and then thermal blanket roof system. Those are the main 4 things that you guys do. And obviously I can see why your employee mentioned that those could be 4 separate companies, and it makes all the sense in the world. But let's just kind of go through one by one what each of those are. So the glass forest, that's probably the thing that made you guys famous to begin with, right? Like that's probably the one thing that put you guys on the map. So tell us what the glass forest is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So I created the first one we did a Parade of Homes house in Coeur d'Alene, designed it in 96, I think, and built it in 97, and the Parade of Homes was 98. But I'd had this idea, and it came from, again, listening to my clients. A lot of times I'd become pretty good friends with my clients, and they'd have me, if I'm in their town, they'd have me over, years later for dinner or something. And I'd always ask, what you like best. Right. And one of the comments, there were a number of comments that were impactful to me, but one of them that I heard over and over again, it was always from the wife and not the husband. And it was, I wish that wall was all glass. Usually the great room, facing the view. And so I had this idea, and it also, harkens back to my time I spent in Japan and working with master carpenters in Japan and architects in Japan, where residential architecture is still largely defined by blurring the difference between interior and exterior space. And so this idea was, how can I do that? What she just said, how can I make that whole wall glass and still hold the roof up, And so finally got the opportunity to try it. I tried to explain it to a couple of clients, and it was too outside their realm of, comprehension. And so I had to do it in a spec home that I was a part investor in. And that started, it got published in a magazine. And basically what it is, and all our systems are actually fundamentally ridiculously simple. But, like Leonardo said, that's the ultimate form of sophistication is simplicity. And so it basically is a system where it's actually a what's known as a moment frame, which is probably, most folks don't understand what that means, but it's a structural term. So it can withstand earthquakes, and usually done with steel. And we do it with wood. And it allows us to do floor to ceiling glass. And we have a direct relationship with the glass panel manufacturer in Canada. And so we're able to offer this unique building system as a structural system, completely air and bug and watertight, and comes with a 10-year warranty through the manufacturer because of our mutual understanding for engineering and installation. And so that's really the definition of a glass forest, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I tell you, if you're going to build a home of any kind in a place that has just a completely picturesque view, like Coeur d'Alene has many of, right? Or any lake in Wisconsin or Michigan or, whatever, where there's that type of a view, or Utah or Colorado. I mean, these places that just have these crazy picturesque views, I can certainly understand why that floor to ceiling is something that draws people in.
Yeah. And you're right. It has been our main drawing card for the last, 25, 30 years. So the next one, the next system, I guess, would be the Schafer wall system. One of the other comments I heard from these clients, sitting at their dinner table years later is, they'd say, we just love, wish that wall was glass. We just love the roof logs and the roof, the cathedral ceiling and all that. Not one of them ever said, yeah, we just love the walls. Mm. So I thought at that time, and it was 97 when I first started thinking about this, and it was due to this Hong Kong stock market crash. July 7th of 97, the Hong Kong stock market crashed because of in January 1st of 98, Britain was handing Hong Kong over back to China. And so in anticipation of that, their stock market crashed, and that wiped out my business in Japan and the Philippines that I'd enjoyed for a while. So out of necessity, I needed to figure, and it devalued all of the Pacific Rim currencies about 35% against the US dollar, including the Canadian dollar. So now suddenly the Canadian handcrafters could come down with their Canadian handcrafted and just clean our clocks. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't discount enough. We could, at a loss is the only way we could do anything. So I had to get innovative. And so one of the biggest issues I've heard from clients over the years is that, again, we deliver a great, beautiful log package, and then the guys on site may mess it up or take longer or whatever. So I thought, how can I eliminate that issue? And so the panelization of the log walls, which just came to fruition a few years ago, took a long time to figure it out, is really the end result of that. So now when a wall package arrives, it's already assembled, the windows are installed and trimmed out, the electrical's been run, the slots for the interior partitions to fit against have been cut, the logs are stained and chinked. This is the time frame that it takes on site to do that. All of that work to those walls is, on average house, is 3 to 5 months, depending on weather and subtrades getting along, and et cetera, and all those things. And all of that is wiped out by a Schafer wall package. It arrives that way. And they typically go together in about a week or 2 at the most. And we provide an on-site technician to work with the local tradespeople to see that it goes together correctly. So and every wall is what's known as a shear wall, which is another, structural term. So extremely strong, non-settling. And now we've taken handcrafted log construction onto the same level as any other type. So the architects don't have to worry about settling. Every wall is a shear wall. A lot of options available to designers and architects.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's very innovative. I mean, you think of, for me, that makes me think of a manufactured home on steroids, right? I mean, even manufactured homes don't show up completely set up like that, but they do come in pieces that can be put together. So it's that plus, so to speak.
Yeah. And the whole, I think one of the industry terms is, component or panelized. There's a number of different terms that are used for it, but that is not the dirty word it used to be. There's some amazing companies out there building these kit style, but although they're customizable, very customizable, and they're high end and they're gorgeous and they're long lasting, and you get better quality control of the actual construction process in that controlled environment in the factory, because those guys are there every day. They get to go home at night. They're not traveling. You can really oversee the quality control much better than out on a site on the side of a mountain somewhere where guys are tired of traveling and don't give their best effort.
Yeah, well, and the quality of tools or machinery is going to be far superior inside of a manufacturing facility, as opposed to the guy putting his own square on the log and saying, yep, that's square, or whatever, stick frame, whatever it is, making sure that it's square. I mean, I've lived in enough homes over my lifetime to know that very few walls are actually square or straight.
Exactly. Yeah, folks, because the layperson can't walk around a room like you or I could, and just pick it out and say that wall's not plumb. I can just tell by looking at it. And they just think everything works, and they assume it's all square and plumb.
Yeah, you assume that until it's time to replace the tile or the hardwood, and then you think, wait a minute, why isn't this straight? Because I know the hardwood is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the third Schafer system is the thermal blanket roof, and that is one of the biggest issues I've found in this. Again, trying to address a need. I was on a job in Breckenridge, Colorado, and the framing contractor had been hired to frame the roof, We'd done the log work, and we were there helping him by making specific cuts in the logs where the roof needed to go, that flashing details, that sort of thing. And it was winter, and it had, like happens all the time in Colorado, they got a good 8 to 12 inches overnight, and then it was a bluebird day in the morning, and most of his crew didn't show up. And Kevin was his name, a great builder. And I said, Kevin, what's up? We got work to do here, and we're here from Idaho to work. And he goes, this is my world. He goes, I can't. This is a resort town. I have to, his term. I have to hire knuckle draggers, is what he called snowboarders, who can't even spell hammer as framers, and pay them $25 to $30 an hour and hope that they show up. And that's it. So I thought, this is just terrible. Here's my client paying all this money, not getting the best craftsmanship, not getting attention to detail, not focused on their dream like we are. And so I thought, how can I create a roof system that is much faster to install and better? And one of the other issues is that you typically finish the ceilings of these cathedral roof systems with what I call store-bought material, 2x6 or 1x6 tongue and groove. We've all seen our tongue and groove roof systems all over the mountains, and that is typically kiln dried to 19% moisture content by Western Wood Products standards. And when you're building at 9,000 feet in Colorado, wood dries out to 7 on average. Going to float moisture content of 7 to 9%, not 19. So years later, inside this house that they spent all this time and money building, the boards separate. It doesn't look right. So I did some research, and back in England, in the 19th century, post and beam homes were very popular. So they were, timbers, but they'd have a few posts and a few beams on the roof, and then they'd put heavy planks over those beams, big, thick, heavy planks. And then oftentimes, thatch roofs or sod roofs back then. I thought, well, I've already got the beams on the roof. They're logs or timbers. Why don't I make big planks and kiln dry them to, 10% and make them myself? And so I came up with the thermal blanket roof to address that need. And so now what it is a heavy 3x10, we call it bison board, that we make ourselves. We built a machine to make it. And then that goes down over the roof logs, and then these big foam panels go over that already have the roof sheeting glued to the foam, and it's expanded polystyrene, which can never lose R value because the R value is derived by the air molecules trapped in the expanded polystyrene. It's impervious to water. They build docks on the lakes and rivers with the product. So it never loses R value. And because we're going over a structural decking, we don't have to put any rafters in. So there are no thermal breaks in the roof. It's a solid blanket of foam from fascia line to fascia line. And aside from being extremely energy efficient, because in a conventional rafter roof system, you've got 30 to 40% of it that has the square footage of that roof. 30 to 40% of it is thermal breaks, which means temperature transfer through the insulation. Now, the insulate between the rafters are the thermal breaks, but we've all looked up on roof systems, in the winter in the mountains, and seen these stripes on the roof where the snow's melted or the frost line's not about every 16 inches, and that's where those rafters are. That means heat is escaping there. Those are thermal breaks. We have 0 thermal breaks, and we have no cold soffits because we run the foam all the way to the fascia line. So one of the benefits that I hadn't even thought of until after we'd built it, and I got a call from a contractor in Steamboat, Colorado, that said, "You realize you created a system that won't have any ice dams. It can't have ice dams." I said, "No, I never thought of it." Yeah, because there are no cold soffits, we eliminate the potential of ice dams as well. So amazingly energy efficient, faster to install, fewer pieces to install, and will never lose its R value. So that's the thermal blanket.
Yeah. So is there any reason that couldn't be used in a traditional stick frame home as well?
None at all. In fact, that's really one of the the prime directives for the thermal blanket is to help people understand. You can have your architect design this stick frame lakeside or mountain home, and it could have, yeah, it can have flat roof, mountain modern, very popular right now. And we're doing a number of them where they bring the drawing stud, they send us the drawing by email, and we go through and design a thermal blanket roof with exposed timbers or logs and bison board over the top, and putting that beautiful ceiling, structural and finished ceiling. Again, all the materials arriving pre-finished, stained, so you can build in any weather for conventional stick frame homes.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty intuitive. All right, so we're running out of time, Brian. We got to hit the Schafer wood.
Okay, so Schafer wood is more of a process. It's an antiquing process that I spent about 8 years developing. Only got it to a point where I'm truly happy with it within the last 2 years. And it's a proprietary system of heavy charring, like the Japanese shoshugiban we've probably all heard of, process of charring the wood and brushing the residual off, and then staining or pre-finishing it. And we apply that to siding. Very, very popular. That's the other big growth area for Big Cabin is our siding and fascia. These are areas that get a lot of punishment from the sun, ultraviolet degradation and moisture and snow, etc. So by heating it this much, you actually case harden the wood, and it helps make it less likely to catch on fire. It's less desirable for wood-boring insects, and it can fend off the negative effects of ultraviolet degradation and moisture much, much better than regular wood. Again, it's applied to siding and fascia and timbers, beams, etc. And that's essentially the Schafer wood process or system.
Gotcha. Yeah, really, really cool process, because that's all the things you mentioned, right, are big problems, whether it's termites or just the exposure to the sun or the weather of any kind. That's a big deal. And not to mention, it just gives you the ability to make it show up completely sealed and looking nice and protected for the homeowner.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So like I mentioned, Brian, we're kind of coming to the end of time here. So I've got one, kind of final last question for you here. You mentioned that over the next few years, you want to get to where you're spending less time in Big Cabin, more time in Edgewood, and then also just have more time for you to be able to spend doing the things that you love doing. So what is the ultimate succession plan, exit plan for you personally with the companies?
Well, I see Edgewood. I don't see any significant changes with Edgewood in ownership or anything there. It's my baby. It's what I love to do. And if I can do it like I have been over the last number of years, one project at a time, it doesn't take all my time. And I still love to physically work and go outside and work. And so I'll be doing in addition to that, I'll be doing some of my own developing. And then Big Cabin, I anticipate that, and I've actually already have fielded a couple of interested parties, which are, for lack of a better term, competitors in the marketplace that have seen what we're doing and going, again, their words, I can't compete with that. I don't want to try and ramp up and compete with that. Can I buy in? Can we merge? What can we do? So I anticipate Big Cabin will probably entertain some offers where it's an existing entity, and I'll be very, very careful about that. Buys in and becomes part of it, adds what we're doing to their existing product line and sales force and so on, and relinquish some ownership there, but with that comes additional volume and etc. So that's most likely. But I've got a big 80-acre facility north of Coeur d'Alene where all the machinery and all the people are that do this production, and we'll be keeping them busy with Big Cabin there, I'm sure, one way or the other.
Yeah, and one of the things that I read in your bio and description of the company is that those people have been with you a long time. They're like family to you. They're very important to you, and so any decision that you make about the future of the company will certainly incorporate them into that decision.
Yeah, you're right. Although I will say that this is how humble they are. They constantly tell me, Brian, don't worry about us. No one's worked harder than you to get where we all are, and we appreciate everything you've done for us. If you decide to turn the key and walk away, there'll be no hard feelings. Don't worry about it. So that's how good of people they are.
Yeah, well, that's a great sign of what you've meant to them over the years and what they've meant to you. So that's, hats off to you for being able to pull that off.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So last thing for you, Brian, just throw out there the best way to get in touch with either Edgewood or Big Cabin if people have a need or a desire to connect further.
And the website is the best way. So Edgewood is edgewoodlog.com. That's singular. And Big Cabin is simply bigcabin.com.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to have you tell your story here on the show and what you guys are doing to innovate, an area of the economy that people wouldn't think is super innovative. So I really appreciate the story there.
Oh, thank you, Austin. I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story.
Yeah, you bet.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Join us next week for an introduction to another great tycoon, and be sure to follow us on our social media channels for links to all of our episodes and great content.